In 1963, a photograph captured Hollywood legend Olivia de Havilland holding her young son's hand at Heathrow Airport. It looked like an ordinary moment, but hidden beneath that quiet image was a tragedy already unfolding. She would win Oscars, change Hollywood forever, and live to 104. Yet her greatest battle was not on screen, it was surviving the loss of her own child. The woman behind the legend. But to understand the tragedy that would one day unfold inside Olivia de Havilland's family, we first have to understand the woman at the center of it all. Because long before she became a grieving mother, she was something else entirely, a young woman determined to defy every limitation placed in front of her. Olivia de Havilland was born in Tokyo in 1916, thousands of miles from the Hollywood soundstages that would eventually make her famous. Her childhood was shaped by instability from the very beginning. When her parents' marriage collapsed, her mother took Olivia and her younger sister Joan and started over in California. It was a decision that would alter the course of cinematic history. To the world, Olivia would become elegance personified, intelligent, graceful, unshakably composed. But behind that image was a fierce ambition that many people underestimated. By her late teens, she had already discovered acting, and almost by accident, destiny found her. When a stage production of A Midsummer Night's Dream suddenly lost its lead actress, an unknown teenager stepped into the spotlight. The performance changed everything. Hollywood noticed. Soon, Olivia became one of Warner Brothers' brightest stars, appearing alongside Errol Flynn in a string of enormously successful films. Audiences adored her. Studios adored her. Yet beneath the glamour, frustration was quietly growing. Again and again she was cast as the beautiful woman waiting on the sidelines while men drove the story forward. And Olivia hated it. Most actors in the 1940s accepted the studio system as an unbreakable fact of life. Olivia did not. In one of the boldest moves any actress had ever attempted, she took Warner Brothers to court. Few believed she could win. She did. The legal victory would permanently change Hollywood, weakening the studio's grip on performers and reshaping the entertainment industry for generations. By the end of the decade, she had won 2 Academy Awards and secured her place among the greatest actresses of her era. From the outside, it looked like the perfect story. Fame, respect, triumph. But life has a way of hiding its most important chapters behind moments of success. Because while Olivia was standing on top of Hollywood, another story was quietly beginning, one that had nothing to do with movie premieres or Oscar speeches. It began with a marriage, and eventually it would lead to a son whose life would break her heart. The first marriage. It began with a man who seemed, at least on the surface, to belong in the next chapter of Olivia de Havilland's extraordinary life. By 1946, she was no longer the young actress struggling to be taken seriously. She was an Academy Award winner, one of Hollywood's most respected stars, and a woman who had already defeated one of the most powerful studios in America. To the outside world, it appeared she had finally earned the right to enjoy a quieter, happier future. Then she met Marcus Goodrich. He was older, intellectual, a decorated Navy veteran, and the author of a critically acclaimed novel. Unlike the movie stars and producers who filled Hollywood parties, Marcus carried himself like a man of ideas rather than ambition. For Olivia, that may have been part of the attraction. The connection moved quickly. Only weeks after reconnecting, they were married. At first, it looked like the beginning of a classic post-war love story. The celebrated actress, the respected writer, two accomplished people building a life together away from the noise of Hollywood. But appearances can be deceptive. Behind closed doors, cracks began to emerge. Those who knew the couple described Marcus as brilliant, but difficult a man whose intelligence often came hand in hand with control. The atmosphere inside the home gradually became tense, shaped by moods that could shift without warning, and expectations that left little room for anyone else's voice. And then, in September 1949, their son, Benjamin Briggs Goodrich, was born. For Olivia, it should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. The same year she won her second Academy Award, she also became a mother. Yet while audiences watched her standing triumphantly on Hollywood's biggest stage, a very different reality was unfolding at home. The marriage was already beginning to unravel. Benjamin entered a household carrying far more strain than stability. He was too young to understand it, of course. Children never fully understand the tensions around them. But they feel them. They absorb them. They carry them. By 1952, Olivia had reached her breaking point. In divorce filings, she accused Marcus of cruel treatment that caused both physical and emotional suffering. The marriage was over. Benjamin was only 3 years old. For many families, that might have been the end of the story. For Olivia de Havilland, it was only the beginning. Because as one chapter closed in California, another was waiting across the Atlantic, in a city that would change her life forever: Paris. A new life in Paris. Paris was never supposed to become Olivia de Havilland's final destination. And yet, after the collapse of her first marriage, it became the place where she would rebuild everything. In 1953, newly divorced and raising a young son on her own, Olivia arrived at the Cannes Film Festival carrying more than luggage. She carried disappointment, hard-earned wisdom, and perhaps a quiet determination never to repeat the mistakes of her past. That was when she noticed a man watching her from across the crowd. Not like a fan, not like a journalist chasing a headline, more like someone trying to gather the courage to approach. His name was Pierre Galante, the charismatic executive editor of Paris Match, one of France's most influential magazines. Unlike Marcus Goodrich, Pierre seemed effortlessly warm. He moved through rooms with ease, making people feel seen rather than controlled. Friends described him as charming, sociable, and deeply attentive qualities that must have felt refreshing after the emotional turbulence Olivia had endured. Pierre pursued her relentlessly, and this time Olivia said yes. When they married in 1955, she made a decision that surprised much of Hollywood. Rather than remain at the center of the industry she had helped shape, she left it behind and moved permanently to Paris. For many stars, Hollywood was home. For Olivia, it became something she visited. Paris became where she truly lived. They're surrounded by tree-lined boulevards, and far from studio executives and gossip columns, she created something she had long been searching for: a sense of normalcy. A year later, their daughter Giselle Galante was born. Benjamin was 6 years old by then, old enough to understand that his world was changing, but young enough to embrace it. Suddenly, he was no longer an only child. He was part of a new family, living in a new country, speaking 2 languages, growing up between cultures. For a while, life seemed almost peaceful. Olivia balanced motherhood with selective film roles. The spotlight still followed her, but from a distance now. At home, she was no longer simply a Hollywood icon. She was a mother packing lunches, attending school events, and building memories inside a Paris apartment that would remain her home for the next 6 decades. Yet even this seemingly perfect chapter carried hidden fractures. Over time, Olivia and Pierre drifted apart. The marriage gradually lost the romantic spark, that had once carried it across continents. But unlike her first marriage, this ending unfolded with remarkable restraint. They separated in 1962, and yet they would not officially divorce until 1979. 17 years. An extraordinary arrangement, driven largely by one shared goal: protecting their daughter. It was an unusual choice, but perhaps it revealed something important about both of them. They understood that sometimes love changes form without disappearing entirely. Even after the marriage ended, Pierre remained part of Olivia's life. Years later, when cancer began stealing his strength, it was Olivia who stood beside him once again. Not as a wife, but as someone who still cared. It was a lesson both of her children would witness firsthand, that relationships could end without becoming wars, and that kindness sometimes survives long after love has faded. For Benjamin and Giselle, Paris became more than a city. It became the stage on which the most important chapters of their lives would unfold. And for Benjamin, one of those chapters was about to take a devastating turn. The diagnosis that changed everything. For a time, it seemed as though Benjamin Goodrich had escaped the turbulence that shaped so much of his parents' lives. Growing up in Paris, he moved comfortably between two worlds. He spoke both English and French, attended school in France, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never seemed particularly interested in celebrity. Unlike many children raised in the shadow of fame, Benjamin did not appear consumed by his mother's legacy. He was simply building a life of his own. Photographs from those years show a thoughtful young man standing beside Olivia at airports, public events, and family gatherings. There is something striking about those images now. Looking back, they feel almost deceptive, because hidden behind those ordinary moments was a future nobody could see coming. Then at 19 years old, everything changed. Benjamin was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Today, the disease is often discussed in terms of survival rates and treatment success stories. But in the late 1960s, hearing the word cancer still carried a different weight. It arrived like a storm cloud over an entire family. Suddenly, every plan, every dream, every assumption about the future became uncertain. For Olivia, the woman who had fought Hollywood's most powerful studio and won this, was a battle she could not fight in a courtroom. This time, the enemy was invisible, and it was inside her son. Benjamin endured the treatments available, at the time difficult therapies that pushed the limits of medical science. Doctors focused on saving lives, and in many cases they succeeded. But what few fully understood then was the price some survivors would eventually pay decades later. For now, however, there was good news. Benjamin survived, and perhaps that should have been the end of the story. But life rarely follows such simple scripts. Instead of allowing the diagnosis to define him, Benjamin pressed forward. He returned to his studies, earned advanced degrees, and began building an impressive professional career. He worked as a statistical analyst in the aerospace industry and later entered international banking, navigating a world far removed from movie premieres and Hollywood headlines. From the outside, he appeared to have won. The cancer was gone. The future was open. The crisis had passed, or so everyone believed. What neither Benjamin nor those who loved him fully understood was that the real danger had not disappeared. It had simply gone quiet. And for more than 2 decades, it waited patiently in the shadows. The long shadow of survival. For more than 20 years, Benjamin Goodrich lived as if he had outrun fate. The cancer that once threatened his future seemed to belong to another lifetime. A difficult chapter closed long ago. He built a career. He traveled. He worked in aerospace and international banking. To friends and colleagues, he appeared thoughtful, intelligent, and remarkably resilient. In many ways, he was exactly what every family hopes for after a terrifying diagnosis: a survivor. But survival is not always the same thing as being free. What made Benjamin's story so heartbreaking was that the disease itself did not return. The battle he lost was with something far more elusive: the hidden damage left behind by the very treatments that had once saved him. While medicine had defeated the cancer, it had quietly wounded his heart. Year after year, that damage accumulated in silence. No headlines, no dramatic warnings, just a slow, invisible countdown unfolding inside his body. By the late 1980s, Benjamin was approaching 40 and thinking not about retirement, but reinvention. After years in the private sector, he made a decision that revealed something profound about his character. He returned to academia. He enrolled in a doctoral program, choosing to challenge himself once again, rather than settle into comfort. There is something deeply moving about that choice. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid starting over. Benjamin embraced it. Around this time, he returned to Paris and moved back into his mother's home. Not because he was a child again, but because life had brought him full circle. The city where he had grown up became the place where he would spend his final chapter. And Olivia was there. Not as a Hollywood icon, not as a two-time Oscar winner, simply as a mother. In September 1991, only 2 days after his 42nd birthday, Benjamin died in her Paris apartment. The cause was heart disease linked to the long-term effects of the treatments he had received decades earlier as a teenager. The cancer had been defeated, but its shadow had remained. What happened next felt almost impossible to comprehend. Just 3 weeks later, Benjamin's father, Marcus Goodrich, also died. Father and son, gone within the same month. For Olivia, the loss was almost unimaginable. At 75 years old, she suddenly found herself standing in the aftermath of 2 funerals and a grief that no amount of fame, achievement, or public admiration could soften. She would go on living for nearly 3 more decades. But some absences never truly leave a room, and for the rest of her life, Benjamin's absence would remain one of them. The daughter who chose silence. While Benjamin's story was shaped by a battle he never truly escaped, his younger half-sister chose a completely different path. And perhaps that is why so few people know her name. In a family connected to Hollywood royalty, Giselle Galante spent most of her life doing something that has become increasingly rare in the modern world. She stayed out of the spotlight. Born in Paris in 1956, Giselle grew up in the same elegant city streets where her mother had rebuilt her life. Unlike Olivia, she never chased movie roles. Unlike many celebrity children, she never seemed interested in turning a famous last name into a public identity. Instead, she disappeared into something quieter, something more private. She studied law, pursued journalism, and built a professional life that stood on its own merits. While cameras followed her mother across decades and continents, Giselle remained largely invisible to the public eye. And that invisibility was not an accident. It was a choice. There is something fascinating about that choice when you think about it. Most people spend their lives trying to be noticed. Giselle grew up watching firsthand what fame could demand from a person. The scrutiny, the expectations, the endless public curiosity. Perhaps she understood something many never do. That privacy has its own kind of freedom. As the years passed, her bond with Olivia quietly deepened. While Benjamin's death left a wound that never fully healed, Giselle became an increasingly important presence in her mother's life. Not as an assistant or caretaker, but as a daughter who genuinely enjoyed being near her. The relationship seemed built not on obligation, but on mutual respect. When Olivia received one of the highest honors of her life, being appointed a dame at the remarkable age of 100, when Giselle was there beside her, not in front of the cameras, beside her. That distinction matters, because throughout Olivia's final decades, Giselle occupied a role far more meaningful than public recognition. She became the keeper of family memories, the witness to private moments, and eventually the guardian of a legacy stretching back to Hollywood's golden age. When Olivia died in 2020, at the age of 104, it was Giselle who stepped forward to handle the countless responsibilities left behind. The letters, the archives, the personal belongings, the memories accumulated across more than a century of life. And perhaps that was fitting. Because while millions knew Olivia de Havilland as a screen legend, only one person still knew the private woman behind the legend. The mother who laughed at home, the mother who grieved, the mother who kept going after losing her son. That person was Giselle. And in many ways, her quiet devotion tells us as much about Olivia's life as any Oscar ever could. Growing up in the shadow of a legend. By the time Benjamin and Giselle were old enough to understand who their mother was, Olivia de Havilland had already become something larger than life. She wasn't simply a successful actress. She was history, an Academy Award winner, a Hollywood pioneer, a woman whose legal battle had changed the entertainment industry forever. Everywhere she went, people saw the icon. But what was it like to see the person behind the icon? That question rarely gets asked. And yet, it may be one of the most important parts of this story. Growing up as the child of a global celebrity can be a burden. Fame has a way of filling every room, leaving little space for anyone else's identity to develop. Many children spend years trying either to escape their parents' shadow or to live up to it. Remarkably, Benjamin and Giselle seemed to do neither. Instead, they built lives that reflected their own interests, not their mother's reputation. That was not an accident. Olivia made deliberate choices about how her children were raised. She moved them thousands of miles away from Hollywood and planted roots in Paris, where cameras were less intrusive and celebrity carried less weight. While the world continued celebrating Olivia de Havilland, the actress, her children were growing up in classrooms, neighborhoods, and friendships that felt surprisingly ordinary. They became bilingual, international, independent. More importantly, they became themselves. There was also something deeply thoughtful about Olivia's approach to motherhood. Benjamin was raised in his father's Episcopal faith. Giselle was raised in her father's Roman Catholic tradition. Rather than impose a single identity on her children, Olivia respected the different parts of their heritage. It was a small detail, but revealing. It suggested a mother who paid attention not just to who her children were, but to who they might become. And perhaps the most powerful lesson came from the way she handled her former husbands. Neither marriage lasted. Yet bitterness never seemed to define her. She remained connected to both men long after the relationships ended, even caring for Pierre Galante during his final illness. Her children witnessed something rare, the ability to move beyond resentment without erasing the past. Those lessons mattered, because while the world remembers Olivia for her films and awards, Benjamin and Giselle knew a different version of her. Not the star, not the legend, but the woman who came home every night, who listened, who stayed, and who quietly built a family life far away from the spotlight. And when tragedy eventually arrived, those bonds would be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. The mother who outlived her son. Nothing truly prepares a parent for the moment they must say goodbye to a child. There are losses that feel unnatural, as though they violate the very order of life itself. Children are supposed to bury their parents. Parents are not supposed to stand beside the grave of a son and imagine all the years that will never come. Yet that was the reality Olivia de Havilland faced in September 1991. Benjamin was gone. The brilliant young man who had survived cancer, built a career, crossed continents, and returned to academia was suddenly reduced to memories, photographs, and an empty room inside the Paris apartment they had shared during his final months. And then, before the shock had even settled, another loss arrived. Just 3 weeks after Benjamin's death, Marcus Goodrich died as well. The father, the son, gone within the same month. It is difficult to imagine what those weeks must have felt like for Olivia. Not as a movie star, not as a public figure, but as a 75-year-old mother sitting alone with a grief so large that words could barely contain it. The strange thing about profound loss is that the world does not stop moving. The sun still rises, people still call, life still demands your attention, and somehow you are expected to continue. Olivia did. In public, she remained composed, elegant, dignified, the same woman the world had admired for decades. Interviews came and went. Honors continued to arrive. Audiences still saw the legendary actress who had changed Hollywood forever. But behind that image was a quieter reality. For the next 29 years, Olivia lived as a mother who had outlived her son. 29 years. Longer than many marriages last. Long enough for grief to stop feeling like a wound and become part of the architecture of everyday life. What makes her story particularly striking is that she rarely spoke about Benjamin publicly. There were no emotional television appearances, no memoirs built around personal tragedy, no attempts to transform sorrow into public sympathy. She carried it privately, perhaps because some losses are too sacred to perform, and perhaps because Olivia understood something that only age can teach, that grief does not disappear. It simply changes shape. The awards remained on the shelves. The honors continued to accumulate. But somewhere in the background of every remaining year was the absence of the son she had once held by the hand at Heathrow Airport. The boy in the photograph. The boy who was never supposed to leave first. And yet somehow Olivia kept moving forward. Not because she had forgotten, but because she hadn't. The final years. After Benjamin's death, Olivia de Havilland entered a chapter of life that few people ever expected to witness, not because she disappeared, but because she endured. Years became decades. The world around her changed in ways almost impossible to comprehend. Presidents came and went. Hollywood reinvented itself countless times. Entire generations grew up knowing her only as a legendary figure from another era. And still, Olivia remained, living quietly in the same Paris apartment she had called home for decades. There is something remarkable about longevity, but there is also something lonely about it. The longer a person lives, the more people they inevitably leave behind. By the 2000s, Olivia had become more than a celebrated actress. She had become a living bridge to a vanished world. A woman who had worked during Hollywood's golden age. A woman who had known legends not as historical figures, but as colleagues and friends. One by one, those familiar faces disappeared, leaving her among the final witnesses to an entire chapter of cultural history. Yet even in her later years, she refused to become trapped in nostalgia. Visitors often described her as sharp, curious, and remarkably engaged with the world around her. she continued reading, continued corresponding with admirers, continued participating in the life of the American Cathedral in Paris, a place that had become deeply woven into her personal story. It was there that Benjamin's funeral had been held, and it was there that Olivia herself would eventually be remembered. Then came one final recognition. In 2017, at the age of 101, she became the oldest woman ever appointed a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Most people receive their greatest honors near the peak of their careers. Olivia received one more than half a century after hers. The moment felt almost symbolic, not simply a recognition of her accomplishments, but a tribute to the extraordinary resilience that had defined her entire life. Through triumph, through heartbreak, through loss, and through time itself. When Olivia died peacefully in her sleep on July 26, 2020, she was 104 years old. The headlines celebrated the end of an era, and they were right. But perhaps the most revealing image of her final years was not an Oscar, a red carpet, or a royal honor. It was something far quieter. An elderly woman sitting at a table in Paris, answering letters from strangers alongside her daughter Giselle. A mother, a survivor. A woman who had spent more than a century learning that the most meaningful parts of life are often the ones the public never sees. And when she was gone, only one person remained who knew that private version of Olivia de Havilland better than anyone else, her daughter, the final keeper of the story. Looking back, when people remember Olivia de Havilland, they usually remember the Oscars, the classic films, and the legal battle that changed Hollywood forever. But after everything we've explored, her story feels far more personal than that. Benjamin Goodrich spent his life proving he was more than a cancer diagnosis. He built a career, pursued higher education, and kept moving forward only for the long-term effects of his treatment to catch up with him decades later. Giselle chose a different path. She stepped away from fame, built a quiet life, and eventually became the guardian of her mother's legacy. Today, she remains the last person who knew Olivia not as a Hollywood icon, but simply as a mother. And perhaps that's the real story here. Behind the awards and public admiration was a woman who never stopped showing up for her children. When Benjamin returned to Paris in his final months, she was there. When Giselle stood beside her during her final years, she was there too. The public saw a legend. Her children saw something else. A mother who endured heartbreak, loss, and disappointment, yet never allowed those things to define her. In the end, Olivia de Havilland's greatest achievement may not have been conquering Hollywood. It may have been something much quieter. Being present, because fame fades, records are broken, even legends eventually become history. But the love we leave behind in the lives of those closest to us, that is the legacy that lasts forever.